My name is Willa Vaughn. I am 27 years old. And the moment that finally broke something open inside me was not the year I got evicted, not the month I started sleeping on borrowed couches, and not even the day I stood in a grocery store aisle calculating whether I could afford eggs and gas in the same week. It was the sound of a knife hitting a Thanksgiving plate. A hard, metallic clink, sharp enough to cut through the laughter, the candlelight, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon and buttered rolls, sharp enough to freeze every person at that table. I looked up with half a bite of pumpkin pie still on my fork. My grandmother was staring across the table with a face I had not seen in years. Calm, cold, exacting. The kind of face that told you mercy was still possible, but only if the truth came quickly. Her eyes moved past me and landed on my younger sister. Then she said, very clearly, "Why is there an elderly couple I have never met living in the $1 million lakeside house I bought for Willa?" For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. Not because the words were unclear. Because they did not belong in my life. $1 million house? Bought for me? I was sitting there in a borrowed sweater because the last apartment I had rented had kicked me out 5 weeks earlier. I had $12 and some change in my checking account that morning. My winter coat had a broken zipper. My phone bill was due in 2 days. I had spent the last year juggling shifts so unstable that my sleep schedule felt like a prank someone else was playing on me. People like me did not get sentences like that said across holiday tables. My sister Ivy went rigid beside me. My father lowered his eyes. My mother's hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass. And something old and sick and hidden in that family began to rise. Before I tell you what happened at that Thanksgiving table, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoy stories about family betrayal, survival, and the kind of truth that shows up late, but shows up hard. And if this story hits something personal in you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now let me take you back. Because that night did not begin with a house. It began years earlier, with the quiet way a family can decide one daughter matters less than the other, and then spend years teaching her to call that normal. When I was a little girl, my grandmother Evelyn Vaughn used to write me letters from wherever she was working. She had spent much of her adult life building something enormous out of almost nothing. Real estate, investments, consulting. A life that, to the rest of the family, looked glamorous and unreachable. To me, it looked like postcards with careful handwriting and envelopes that smelled faintly like perfume and airport air and hotel stationery. She never wrote childish letters. She wrote to me like I had a mind. She asked what I was reading, what I thought about people, whether I believed kindness and weakness were the same thing, whether I paid attention when people only acted generous in public, whether I noticed who went quiet when someone else got praised. I loved her for that. She made me feel seen in a way that the people in my own house did not. My parents, Gregory and Helen Vaughn, were not the kind of parents who hit or screamed every day. That would have been easier to explain, easier to name. They were the kind who eroded you, the kind who made you doubt your own reaction before they ever had to deny what they'd done. My sister Ivy was younger than me by 3 years, prettier in the way my mother liked, louder in the way my father forgave, and softer only when there was something to gain from it. She had always known exactly how to tilt her head, widen her eyes, and make trouble look accidental. When we were kids, if she broke something, my mother would sigh and say, "That's just Ivy. She doesn't think." If I broke something, my father would say, "Willa, what is wrong with you lately?" That sentence followed me for years. What is wrong with you lately? Lately could mean the last hour, the last week, the last month. Lately was whatever period they needed it to be in order to make me feel like I was always just slightly defective. By the time I was in high school, the family story had already been written. Ivy was bright and charming and good with people. I was serious, sensitive, difficult, too intense, too private, too proud, too emotional when I defended myself, and too cold when I stopped trying, and yet I still believed effort would fix it. That is the thing people do not always understand about daughters like me. We do not spend our early years plotting revenge. We spend them trying to earn ordinary love. I studied hard. I worked hard. I kept my room clean, kept my tone respectful, kept my grades high, kept my needs small. I graduated near the top of my class in college. Professors wrote me recommendation letters so warm they made me cry in private. I got interviews with companies that felt like the beginning of a different life. Not glamorous, just steady. Enough to make rent on time. Enough to exhale. I remember graduation day with humiliating clarity. The sunlight was too bright. The gown stuck to the back of my knees. Families around me stood in clusters holding flowers and signs and phones. I kept looking up at the bleachers. 2 seats stayed empty. My mother had texted an hour earlier saying they were running behind. Then later she said something had come up with Ivy. Then later she stopped replying. I stood there holding a diploma I had bled for, smiling for pictures alone, feeling like someone had scooped the center out of me and left the outside standing. When I got home that evening, my father barely looked up from the television. My mother said, "The world is full of people with degrees, Willa. Don't act like you climbed Everest." Ivy asked if I was going to take down the graduation photos quickly because the cap and gown looked a little tragic. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because if I had not laughed, I might have broken something. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, sat on the floor with my shoes still on, and stared at the tassel hanging from the cap in my lap until the room went blurry. That was around the time my life began to move in ways I could never understand while I was inside them. I got close to 2 job offers, then both disappeared. Then a third, then a fourth. Each time, the interviews went well. Each time I was encouraged. Each time I was told I seemed like a strong candidate. Each time at the last possible stage, something shifted. Tone changed. Emails became colder. Final calls never came. I told myself that happened to people. It was a hard market, bad timing, other candidates. But after a while, rejection stopped sounding like circumstance and starts sounding like a verdict. So I took what I could get. Part-time work, temporary contracts, reception shifts, weekend retail, late-night administrative cleanup for a local company that underpaid everyone and praised nobody. I stitched 3 jobs together like someone trying to turn scraps into a blanket. Every month I told myself I would get ahead. Every month something went wrong. A fee I did not expect. A charge that should not have been there. A credit issue that made no sense. A loan notice saying a payment had not posted correctly, even though I knew I had paid. I began living in a state that felt like permanent apology. Sorry, I'm just trying to sort this out. Sorry, there must be some mistake. Sorry, I can pay part now and the rest Friday. Sorry. My parents' response never changed. Be more responsible. Stop being dramatic. You need to learn independence. Your sister would never let things get this messy. That last part was a joke so dark I did not even know it was a joke yet. Because while I was working myself into the ground, Ivy was posting photos from wineries, lake weekends, polished brunches, and tastefully expensive-looking places she always described as just a little getaway. Or Kevin's family thing, or life has been so stressful, needed this. Kevin was her husband, smug, agreeable, spineless in exactly the way that allowed him to stand beside wrongdoing and call it neutrality. The kind of man who never started the fire but always seemed warm near it. There was one photo in particular I remember now with acid clarity. A lakeside house behind them. White railings. Stone path. Morning light on the water. Ivy in oversized sunglasses, one hand lifted like she was blocking the sun, captioning it, "New chapter, grateful lake weekend." I had liked it. I had actually liked it. Then I had gone to work a closing shift and eaten crackers for dinner in the stockroom. You have to understand something. When a betrayal is big enough, the pain later is not just what they did. It is remembering all the moments you saw the edge of it and did not know what you were looking at. The month I lost my apartment, it was cold enough that the steering wheel burned my hands in the mornings. I had been late on rent because of a payment issue that should not have existed. I thought I had made up enough ground. I had not. The building manager was not cruel, just done with me. "I'm sorry," she said. "We've given extensions already." I nodded like I understood. Then I went upstairs and packed my life into bags so quickly, it felt like stealing from myself. When you are being evicted, you discover how little dignity there is in needing somewhere to put your winter shoes. One friend let me stay 4 nights. Another let me take her couch for a week, then another. I kept my things in my trunk and learned how to arrange my face so nobody would see the panic. I showered at odd hours. I answered texts with too many exclamation marks so people would think I was fine. My mother knew. She knew because I told her. Finally, after resisting the humiliation for weeks, I called and said, "Mom, I might need help for just a little while. I'm trying to figure this out." There was a pause. Then she said, "At your age, needing rescue is embarrassing, Willa." I still remember the exact way the silence felt after that. Thin, sharp, like she had slid something between my ribs and left it there. My father got on the phone later and said, "If we step in every time you stumble, you'll never become capable." Not once did they ask where I was sleeping, not once. And yet that Thanksgiving, less than 6 weeks later, I would find out that for 3 years they had been living off property meant for me. That is the kind of truth that rearranges your whole understanding of the past. Not because it changes what happened, because it reveals intention. Bad luck is one kind of pain. Being deliberately cornered is another. My grandmother had been away overseas for years due to business. Gone emotionally, just physically distant. We had lost touch slowly, then almost completely. I thought it was adulthood, timing, distance, busy lives. I did not know there had been hands on the wire between us. The week before Thanksgiving, my Aunt Claire called me. Claire was my father's sister, quieter than the others. Never openly rebellious, but not fully swallowed by the family system either. The kind of woman who had learned to survive by speaking carefully and remembering everything. She said, "Willa, don't hang up. I have someone here who needs to talk to you." Then I heard my grandmother's voice, older than I remembered, stronger than I expected. "Willa," I sat up so fast I almost dropped the phone. "Grandma?" The sound that came out of me was not graceful. It was halfway between a breath and a child's cry. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Why have you not answered a single letter I've sent for 3 years?" I thought I had misheard. "Letter?" "Yes. Every month. Sometimes twice. I wrote to ask how the house was, whether you liked the area, whether you needed anything. I sent photos, notes, my travel schedule. I even sent the deed copies once when I wanted you to understand the tax structure." I started shaking. "Grandma," I said slowly, "I have never received any house. I have never received any letters about a house. I don't know what you're talking about." There was a long silence on the line. Then she said something very soft. I knew it. Not shocked, not confused, not even angry yet, just grimly confirmed. As if a suspicion she had been carrying had finally landed hard enough to become real. She told me she had returned recently. Quietly. Without announcing it to the family. She had gone to check on the lakeside property she had purchased 3 years earlier in my name. A surprise gift, she said, for my future. For my independence. For the life she assumed I would be beginning after graduation. Instead of finding me there, she had found an elderly couple, Kevin's parents. They had been polite, comfortable, entirely at home. And when she asked who they were, they said they were living there because the house belonged to their daughter-in-law, Ivy. Not me. I remember gripping the edge of my friend's kitchen counter so hard my fingers cramped. "I don't understand." "You will," my grandmother said, "and I think they're about to understand something too." That was when she told me the rest. She believed my parents had intercepted her mail. She believed they had lied about my mental state. She believed I had been deliberately isolated. And then, in the same calm voice she might have used to discuss weather, she said, "I would like to give them the opportunity to ruin themselves in one sitting." I blinked. "What?" "Thanksgiving dinner," she said. "They will all be there. They still think I am old, absent, and easy to redirect. Good, let them." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Can you act frightened if necessary?" I let out one broken laugh. "I don't think that part will require acting." For the first time, I heard a note in her voice that sounded like sorrow. "No," she said. "I suppose not." Thanksgiving at my parents' house had always been theater. Not warmth. Performance. The good dishes, the polished silver, the family photos displayed in a hallway that never reflected what living there actually felt like. My mother in a deep red blouse pretending she enjoyed hosting. My father opening wine like civilization itself depended on his wrists. Ivy arriving late enough to be noticed, dressed as if gratitude required hair appointments. That year, I nearly did not go. A sane person would have skipped it. A person with healthy instincts would have protected what little dignity she had left. But I was not going for them. I was going because my grandmother had asked me to. And because some part of me, even then, needed to see the truth with my own eyes. Not suspect it, not infer it, not piece it together later in the dark. See it. My grandmother arrived 10 minutes after I did. She wore charcoal gray, minimal jewelry. Her silver hair was pinned back in a way that made her look even less approachable. When my mother kissed her cheek, my grandmother barely turned her face enough to allow it. When my father offered to take her coat, she kept it draped over her own arm until she chose to hand it off. Ivy came in laughing with Kevin, too loud, too bright, already slightly defensive in ways no one else at the table recognized yet. Dinner started politely. The weather, travel, Kevin's work. A recipe my mother had changed. A shallow little river of family conversation, all surface and no depth. Then dessert came, plates shifted, forks lifted, and my grandmother spoke. "Willa," she said, not looking at me yet. "Why is there an elderly couple I don't recognize living in the lakeside house I bought for you?" That was the knife drop moment. My father's hand jerked. My mother froze. Ivy's breathing changed. I put my fork down slowly and looked at her. "Grandma, what did you just say?" The room was silent enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. She turned her eyes to me then, and there it was, the tiniest flicker of pity. "The lakeside house," she said. "The one I purchased for you 3 years ago." I laughed once in disbelief, then stopped because nothing about her face allowed for laughter. "Grandma, there has to be some mistake. I don't own any house. I can barely keep a bank account from overdrafting. I got evicted last month." My grandmother's eyebrow moved. Not dramatically, just enough. "What?" I swallowed. My throat felt tight. Some of my shaking was real. Maybe all of it. "I've been staying with friends. I don't have a home. I don't even have my own apartment." The room changed. I cannot explain it better than that. It changed. The air got heavier. Everyone's body language shifted from performance to defense. My grandmother set her napkin down with almost unbearable calm. "As soon as I returned, I went to surprise you. Instead of you, I found an older couple living there. They introduced themselves as Kevin's parents and said they were staying in a home owned by their daughter-in-law, Ivy." She turned her head. "Ivy, explain." Ivy gave a small laugh that died halfway out of her mouth. "Grandma, honestly, you must have mixed something up. There are a lot of properties near the lake. Maybe you got the address wrong." "That's right," my mother said too quickly. "You've had a long flight. It's probably—" "Be quiet." My grandmother did not raise her voice much. She did not have to. My mother stopped speaking as if someone had shut a door on her face. Then, my grandmother reached into her handbag and took out a photograph. She slid it across the table. I remember the glossy sound it made against the wood. "There," she said. "That is the house. And that is Ivy in front of it, smiling beside Kevin and his parents." I stared down. White railings, stone path, morning light on the water, the same house from the photos, the same one I had liked online. Something in my chest went hot and hollow at the same time. I heard my own voice before I fully felt myself speak. "Mom, Dad." I looked up. "What does this mean?" My father cleared his throat. "Willa, today is Thanksgiving. This is not the appropriate setting for a financial misunderstanding." A financial misunderstanding. I almost admire the sentence now for how shameless it was. My grandmother did not let him keep it. "No, we are doing this now." Then she looked back at me. "Willa, you truly know nothing?" "I know nothing," I said. "I have never seen deed paperwork. I have never received a key. I have never stayed in that house. I did not even know it existed." Her face hardened completely. Then she turned toward my parents with the kind of stillness that is worse than visible rage. "Gregory, Helen, you told me Willa was unstable. You told me she was not capable of managing a major asset and that you would temporarily supervise the property until she became more independent." The room tilted. I looked at my parents as if I had never seen them before. "What?" My mother lifted a hand in that familiar little calming gesture she used when what she wanted was not calm but control. "Willa, don't get emotional." I stood so fast my chair scraped violently back. "Don't get emotional?" My father slammed his palm against the table. "Sit down." "No." That word came out of me from somewhere old, somewhere starved. No. You told Grandma I was mentally unstable? My mother said, you have always been fragile. I laughed then, a short disbelieving sound that hurt my throat. Fragile? I graduated on time. I worked 3 jobs. I got myself through years of this family pretending I was the problem. When exactly did I become mentally unstable? Was it before or after you let me get evicted? Watch your tone, my father barked, and that was when Ivy snapped. She tossed her napkin down and said, "Oh, please. Can we stop pretending Willa should have had that house? She would have ruined it. She can barely manage her own life." The room went dead still. Then she added with the breathtaking cruelty of someone who had never truly been punished a day in her life, "A plain, miserable woman like her doesn't even know what to do with something beautiful." I think that was the moment I stopped hoping there had been some explanation buried under all of it. No misunderstanding, no clumsy judgment call, no badly handled protection. Just greed. Just contempt. My grandmother pushed her chair back and stood. "Rotten," she said. "Every one of you." She came around the table and laid a hand on my shoulder. It was light, steady, human. And because of that, I nearly burst into tears. Instead, I held still. Then she took out her phone, pressed one button, and said, "Come in." A few seconds later, the front door opened. Mr. Daniel Mercer stepped inside carrying a heavy briefcase. He had been my grandmother's attorney for years. Crisp suit, controlled voice. The kind of man who looked born to slide consequences across polished tables. My father went pale. "What is this?" My grandmother did not look at him. "This," she said, "is where your evening ends." Mr. Mercer placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and removed a stack of documents thick enough to make my mother's face lose color. I wiped my hands on my napkin because they had started to sweat. Some part of me had known this was coming. Another part still could not believe it was real. My grandmother sat again, but not at the head of the table this time, beside me. That mattered more than anyone else there probably understood. For years I had been the daughter positioned across from judgment, across from dismissal, across from the family version of events. That night, for the first time, I was not alone in the room where I was being defined. "Begin," my grandmother said, and Mr. Mercer did. The first document was a registry record. Property, Lakeside Manor. Original purchaser, Evelyn Vaughn. Initial ownership structure, Evelyn Vaughn in trust for Willa Vaughn. Intended beneficiary, Willa Vaughn. Current registered owner, Ivy Thompson. Transfer value, $1. $1. I stared at the page until the numbers lost shape. 3 years. 3 years of unpaid bills, overdrafts, humiliation, debt calls, credit denials, borrowed couches, and panic. 3 years of that house existing in my name first, and then being stripped away for the price of a vending machine snack. I heard myself say very quietly, "That was the year I graduated." Nobody answered. Because everyone knew. Mr. Mercer turned a page. According to this transfer, the beneficiary voluntarily signed over the property to her sister as a gift. "That's correct," Ivy said too fast. Willa knew she couldn't manage it. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And her lipstick was perfect. Her hands were shaking. Kevin sat beside her with the expression of a man silently praying to become wallpaper. Mr. Mercer slid a second report forward. Handwriting analysis places the probability that the signature on this transfer was written by Miss Ivy Thompson at over 99%. Ivy's face went blank. Then white. My father leaned in. "This is ridiculous." Mr. Mercer did not even glance up. Digital forensic analysis also determined the document was printed 6 months ago. That landed harder than the handwriting report, because you could feel the timeline clicking into place. 6 months ago. My grandmother had told the family she might return home soon. 6 months ago they had panicked. 6 months ago, after 3 years of living inside the lie, they had tried to build it paper legs. I turned slowly to my father. "So that's why." His jaw tightened. "That's why what?" "That's why every time my life started to move forward, something happened. Because if I became stable, independent, reachable, I might start asking questions." My mother whispered, "Willa, no." I held up a hand and surprised all of us by how steady it was. "No, you don't get to soothe me now." Then I looked at Mr. Mercer. "Show them the rest." His eyes flicked to mine, professional but not unkind, and then he nodded. He produced a series of printed emails. Anonymous messages sent to human resources departments at 3 companies I had nearly joined. The content was so vile, my skin went cold. Claims that I had severe mental instability. Claims that I had been disruptive in academic settings. Claims that I posed a reputational risk. All lies. All timed within hours of final stage hiring decisions. The IP logs tied the messages to my parents' house, to my father's office computer. I did not scream. I wanted to. Instead, I felt something much worse. Recognition. All those years I had blamed myself for not being enough, not impressive enough, not polished enough, not chosen. And all along there had been a man in the next room from my childhood bedroom, sending poison into doors I was trying to walk through. I looked at my father and said, "You did this." He said, "I was trying to protect you from jobs you couldn't handle." I laughed once. Harsh. Ugly. "You destroyed my career before it started." He shouted, "I did what was necessary." Necessary. That word. People who benefit from cruelty love words like necessary, complicated, practical, family. They cover theft in them like cloth over bad furniture. Mr. Mercer was already moving to the next set of pages. Bank statements. My name on one side, my mother's hidden account on the other. Auto diversions, redirections, deposits I had made for student loan repayment rerouted elsewhere. Not a one-time theft. A system. A plan. Month after month, I remember my hand going to my mouth. I remember saying, no. Not because I doubted the document. Because some part of me still could not bear how deliberate it all was. My mother started crying before anyone accused her. That alone told me everything. "Willa, I meant to fix it later." The sentence made me go cold. Later. After how much damage? After how many nights counting coins? After how many rejected rental applications? After how many mornings of waking up with fear already in my bloodstream? "You kept telling me to be more like Ivy," I said. "All while you were stealing the money I was trying to use to stay afloat." "You always made things so hard," she whispered. I stared at her. There are moments when the deepest hurt is not what someone did. It is the window their excuse opens into how little they ever thought you were entitled to. Ivy was crying now too, but angrily, as if she had somehow been dragged into unfairness. When Mr. Mercer revealed the rent transfers from Kevin's parents to her account, $5,000 every month, she stopped pretending entirely. "So what?" she snapped. The house was being used. Better than leaving it empty. I turned to her. "Used?" She lifted her chin. Kevin's parents wanted somewhere peaceful. It benefited everyone. Everyone? My voice came out very soft. That made her falter more than if I had shouted. "I was sleeping on couches," I said. "I was rationing groceries. I was blacklisted from housing because my credit was wrecked, and you were collecting rent on a house that was supposed to be mine." She looked away. That told me enough too. What happened next was ugly in the most ordinary way. Not cinematic, not noble, just ugly. My father blamed my mother for mishandling the money. My mother blamed my father for the email sabotage. Ivy blamed both of them for telling her the forged transfer was safe. Kevin tried to say he had not known the legal details. My grandmother said, "Be silent, all of you." And even that felt too merciful compared to what they deserved. Mr. Mercer kept going. Interception of letters addressed to me. False statements made to my grandmother about my address, my supposed condition, my lack of gratitude, my inability to manage life. It all came out. Not because they suddenly chose honesty. Because the evidence had already arrived and all they had left was panic. At one point, my mother said, "We were doing what was best for the family." And my grandmother answered, "No. You were doing what was profitable for yourselves." That was the exact sentence. I remember it because it hit with the finality of a door slamming shut. Years of family mythology collapsed in one line. Not concern, not hard love, not difficult decisions. Profit. That is all I had ever been measured against in that house. What I cost, what I threatened, what could be extracted if I stayed small. I sat there listening to it all, and thought about the younger version of myself, who had spent years trying to correct her tone, trying not to be too sensitive, trying not to make things worse, trying not to deserve the coldness. I wanted to reach back through time and take her by the face and say, "It was never you. You were not too emotional. You were reacting to emotional abuse. You were not failing mysteriously. You were being sabotaged. You were not unlucky. You were being fed to other people's appetites and then blamed for bleeding." My grandmother asked Mr. Mercer one final question. "The will?" He nodded and placed another document before her. This evening I executed an amendment, she said. Gregory Vaughn, Helen Vaughn, Ivy Thompson, and Kevin Thompson are removed entirely from my estate. Willa Vaughn is my sole heir. My father stood up so violently his chair tipped. Mother, you cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. My mother dropped to pleading instantly, the tears now fully transactional. Please, we made mistakes. Ivy looked at me then, really looked at me, and there it was. Not remorse, expectation, family expectation, the old poison. The belief that no matter what they did, I would eventually soften because that had always been my role. The absorbent one. The one who suffered and then made the room comfortable again. My grandmother saw it too. If you wish to beg forgiveness, she said, do not direct it at me. 3 faces turned toward me. My mother first. Then my father. Then Ivy. I have never forgotten what that felt like. Not power. Clarity. I picked up my glass, took 1 sip of water, set it down and said, no. Just that. My father started speaking over me. Willa, think carefully. No, I repeated. For years I thought maybe if I worked harder, explained better, asked less, stayed calmer, I could earn basic decency from this family. I was wrong. You didn't misunderstand me. You used me. My voice shook then, but I did not stop. You watched me drown and called it character building. You stole from me and called it management. You isolated me and called me unstable. So no, I don't have forgiveness for you tonight. What I have is a demand. Mr. Mercer slid the restitution document toward the center of the table. Unjust enrichment, fraud damages, emotional distress. The total was just over $2 million. My father stared at it like it was written in a dead language. My mother whispered, we don't have that. I looked at her. You had 3 years to think about what I had, which was nothing. Ivy burst into tears then, truly panicked for the first time. If Kevin's parents have to leave that house, he'll blame me. That, I said, sounds like your problem. There was a knock at the door. Heavy, official. No one had to explain who it was. 2 county officers entered. Ivy made a sound I still hear sometimes when I wake in the night. Not because I pity her, but because terror always sounds animal when it is finally forced to face consequence. My mother started sobbing in a way that made her almost unrecognizable. My father kept saying, we can settle this privately. But there was no private left. That was the point. Their whole power had depended on quiet rooms, manipulated narratives, missing letters, false documents, isolated targets. Truth had walked into the dining room and turned the lights on. When my mother looked back at me while they were leading her out and said, please, Willa, I felt something strange. Not satisfaction exactly. Not softness, release. Because for once I did not need to explain my pain to the people who caused it. For once they were the ones being dragged into a version of reality they did not control. Goodbye, Mom, I said. That was all. The sirens faded, the house went silent. Then it was only me, my grandmother, and Mr. Ed Mercer in the dining room that had held so much rot for so many years. I sat down because my knees had gone weak. My grandmother touched my cheek with the backs of her fingers. It's over, I whispered. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, no, it begins now. If you've ever had people close to you rewrite your reality while you're still trying to survive it, then you know this part matters too. The ending is not the arrest. It is not the exposure. It is not even the victory in the room. The ending is what happens after, when the noise dies and you have to learn how to live without bracing for the next blow. That part took time. The legal cases moved faster than I expected because the evidence was overwhelming. The forged transfer collapsed immediately. The rental income trail was clear. The diverted loan payments were documented. The sabotage emails were traceable. The intercepted correspondence established pattern and intent. Kevin's parents claimed they had believed Ivy had legal rights to the house. Whether they fully knew or not, the courts did not view them kindly once the payment records and forged paperwork came out. The property was vacated. Possession returned. My name restored. It should have felt triumphant the first day I stood on the deck of Lakeside Manor. Instead I cried. Not delicately, not beautifully. I cried like someone whose body finally realized it had lived under attack for years. The lake was calm, the air smelled like cedar and cold water. The porch boards creaked under my weight. I remember touching the railing and thinking, this was mine while I was sleeping in strangers' living rooms. That sentence knocked the wind out of me. My grandmother came to stand beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't see sooner." I shook my head, but she stopped me. "No, let me say it, I trusted the wrong people with access to you. I will regret that for the rest of my life." I took her hand. "You came back." She squeezed once. "Yes," she said, "and now you're not going through the rest alone." I wish healing were dramatic enough to make for a clean montage. It isn't. It is practical. Boring sometimes, magnificent in ways no one claps for. It was changing passwords, fixing my credit, closing fraudulent links, working with accountants, talking to a therapist for the first time and discovering anger can survive in the body long after the mind decides to move on. It was learning that I did not need to apologize when I asked a question. It was sleeping in a locked bedroom and still waking up at 3:17 a.m. because some part of me believed the floor could still disappear. It was opening the mailbox and not flinching. It was grocery shopping without calculating the price difference between hunger and shame. It was buying a coat with a zipper that worked and nearly crying in the parking lot because such a small thing felt like luxury. A year passed. Then another shape of life started to appear. I had always been good at seeing systems, patterns, gaps, emotional dynamics hidden inside paperwork and policy. Surviving my family had made me observant in all the worst ways, but observation is a skill that can become useful once it is no longer only defensive. I started consulting remotely at first. Small projects, then more. Administrative recovery, financial organization for women coming out of messy family entanglements, then broader coaching and strategic planning. I did not market myself as some guru. I told the truth. I understood what it meant to be cornered financially by people who still expected access to your loyalty. The response was bigger than I expected. Then, bigger than that. Word spread. Women wrote to me from all over, some older than me, some younger, some wealthy, some barely holding on. Different details, same structure. A daughter made dependent, then judged for needing help. A niece manipulated out of paperwork she did not understand. A widow pressured to sign temporary things that were never temporary. A woman told her confusion proved incompetence. Once you know how this kind of cruelty works, you start seeing its fingerprints everywhere. I built a business out of helping people name it before it swallowed them. The irony was almost obscene. The family that tried to keep me powerless had accidentally trained me to detect the machinery of exploitation with frightening precision. My income grew. My schedule filled. For the first time in my life, money stopped feeling like something I was always running behind and started feeling like a tool I could actually hold. Not for status, for peace. That matters more than people admit. Peace is expensive when you were raised in chaos. My grandmother began spending weekends at the lake house with me. Sometimes we worked in silence by the fireplace. Sometimes we played cards. Sometimes she told me stories about deals she had made 30 years earlier and mistakes she would never repeat again. One evening we sat on the deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the last gold light slide over the water. She said, "Do you know the most infuriating part?" I smiled faintly. "There are several." She smiled too. "They thought giving you hardship would keep you small." I looked out at the lake. The water barely moved. And it revealed your spine. I was quiet for a long time after that. Because the truth is, I do not believe suffering automatically makes people stronger. Sometimes it just wounds them. Sometimes it steals years they never get back. I will never romanticize what happened to me. I lost time, safety, trust, opportunity, simplicity. There are parts of my 20s I will never recover, but I did recover myself. That is different, and that matters. The last time I heard anything about my parents, they were living in a small apartment 2 counties over. My father's business had collapsed under the weight of legal costs and reputation damage. My mother had apparently tried more than once to reach extended family and found fewer doors open each time. Ivy served her sentence, divorced Kevin, and came out of the whole thing with less than she once flaunted on social media. People ask me sometimes whether I ever forgave them. The answer is more complicated than yes or no. I no longer wake up wanting to punish them. I no longer build my days around what they did. I no longer feel my chest tighten when I imagine their faces. But forgiveness, at least the version people like to pressure women into, often sounds suspiciously like restored access. And no, they do not have that. They do not get my home. They do not get my voice. They do not get to rewrite the story into one where they made mistakes and I matured through them. No, they committed cruelty with planning, with paperwork, with repetition, with entitlement. I survived it. Then I exposed it. Then I built a life they could no longer contaminate. That is the truth. And it is enough. Today, when I stand on the deck of Lakeside Manor, with a mug warming my hands and the morning rising slow off the water, I do not feel like a woman who won a prize. I feel like a woman who came back for herself. That is better. Because a house is only a house until safety lives in it. Money is only money until you can breathe around it. Freedom is only a word until the people who benefited from your silence can no longer reach you. My name is Willa Vaughn. I am 27 years old, and the family that tried to convince the world I was too unstable to manage my own future ended up proving something else entirely. I was never the weak one in that story. I was the one they had to keep breaking in order to keep stealing. And when the truth finally sat down at the table, they did not survive it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay with me for the next one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild your life after discovering the people closest to you were the ones quietly tearing it apart? I read more of your stories than you know.